The moment my mother said, "Josh can cover it," without even looking at me first, I realized my family had never actually seen me as a person. Just a wallet with emotions. I'm Josh, 32 years old, from Chicago. And if I'm being honest, I should have seen this coming years ago. Because my family had always treated me differently. Not badly in obvious ways. That would have been easier to recognize. No, they treated me well as long as I was useful. As long as I paid for things. As long as I solved problems. As long as I stayed quiet. My younger brother Eric was the golden child growing up. Didn't matter that he dropped out of college after one semester or that he changed jobs every 4 months because every boss was apparently toxic. My parents always defended him. Eric just needs time. Eric's figuring himself out. Eric has a creative spirit. Meanwhile, I was expected to be perfect. Straight A's, part-time job at 16, scholarships, no trouble, no complaints. And somehow, the reward for being responsible was becoming everybody's backup plan. At first, it started small. "Hey, Josh, can you spot your brother gas money? Can you help your aunt with her electric bill this month? Can you cover dinner? We'll pay you back." Nobody ever paid me back, but every time I hesitated, my mother would hit me with the same guilt trip. Family helps family. I swear those 3 words ruined years of my life. By 32, I had a good career managing financial accounts for a logistics company downtown. I made decent money, not millionaire money, but enough to live comfortably. I owned a condo, had savings, no debt. Meanwhile, most of my relatives lived in constant chaos. And somehow that chaos always became my responsibility. What finally broke me happened 3 months ago at my cousin Melanie's engagement dinner. Melanie and I grew up together, but we were never especially close. She mostly called me when she needed favors. Still, when I got invited to the engagement celebration, I decided to go. Big mistake. The dinner was at this upscale restaurant downtown. One of those places with dim lighting, fancy wine menus, and waiters who speak softer than therapists. The second I walked in, something already felt off. Everyone else was dressed almost overly formal. My aunt rushed over dramatically. "There you are," she said, grabbing my arm. "We were worried you weren't coming. Not happy you're here. Not good to see you. Just relief." At the time, I didn't understand why. Then I noticed the seating arrangement. Every adult was seated at the main tables near the center. I was seated all the way at the side, next to Melanie's teenage cousins and 2 actual children coloring on menus. I genuinely thought there had been some mistake. I laughed awkwardly and said, I think somebody mixed up the seating chart." My aunt smiled without embarrassment. "Oh no, honey, we just needed to make room for Jason's business partners." Jason was Melanie's fiancé. Apparently random business acquaintances ranked higher than me in the family hierarchy. That stung more than I expected, but I swallowed it, like always. Dinner started, speeches happened, people laughed, champagne flowed everywhere. And the entire night, nobody really spoke to me unless they needed something. "Josh, can you pass this? Josh, can you take a picture? Josh, can you grab another chair?" At one point, I realized I was basically functioning as unpaid restaurant staff. Then came the moment that changed everything. The waiter arrived near the end of the night holding a black payment folder, and my mother casually said words that made my stomach drop. "Oh, Josh has it." The waiter immediately turned toward me. I blinked. "I'm sorry, what?" My aunt laughed like I was joking. "The bill, sweetheart." I stared at her, then at my mother, then at everyone else, suddenly avoiding eye contact. Something cold settled in my chest. "How much is the bill?" Nobody answered immediately. That was the first red flag. Finally, Jason quietly muttered, "Around $3,600. I honestly thought I heard him wrong. $3,600. My mother sighed dramatically like I was causing a scene already. "Joshua, lower your voice." That's when I realized this had been planned. They invited me expecting me to pay for the entire engagement dinner. Without asking me, without warning me, without even pretending I had a choice. I laughed once, not because anything was funny, but because I genuinely couldn't believe human beings could be this entitled. "You seriously expected me to pay $3,600 tonight?" My aunt crossed her arms immediately. "Well, you make the most money." There it was. The family logic, punishment disguised as responsibility. Eric suddenly chimed in from across the table. "Bro, it's not that deep, you can afford it." That sentence hit me harder than it should have, because nobody there was asking. They were telling me, like my money already belonged to them. Jason looked deeply uncomfortable. Honestly, he was the only person at that table who looked embarrassed. He leaned toward Melanie and whispered something. She rolled her eyes immediately. Then my mother delivered the line that finally snapped something inside me. "After everything this family has done for you, you're really going to humiliate us over money?" I just stared at her. Because deep down, I realized something horrifying. I couldn't remember the last thing this family had actually done for me. Not emotionally, not financially, not mentally. Nothing. I'd spent years funding emergencies, solving problems, babysitting grown adults emotionally and financially. And somehow they still saw me as selfish the second I stopped cooperating. The waiter was still standing there awkwardly. Everyone at nearby tables had started glancing over, and for the first time in my life I stopped trying to keep the peace. I looked directly at the waiter and said calmly, "Separate my meal from the bill." Silence, pure silence. You would have thought I slapped somebody. My aunt's face turned red instantly. My mother whispered, "Joshua," in that warning tone she used when I was a child. But I didn't care anymore. The waiter nervously nodded. "Of course, sir." Melanie stood up so fast her chair screeched. "Are you serious right now?" I looked at her. No, serious would have been asking me before trying to stick me with a $3,600 bill. Eric scoffed loudly. "God, you're so dramatic." That word, dramatic. People love calling you dramatic when you stop tolerating disrespect. I reached into my wallet, handed the waiter my card for my own food and drinks, then stood up. And the second I did, my mother said the sentence that permanently destroyed our relationship. "If your father were alive, he'd be ashamed of you." That one hit deep, because my dad died 6 years earlier, and she knew exactly how to weaponize that pain against me. The old version of me would have folded instantly, apologized, paid the bill, gone home miserable, but something inside me was exhausted. I looked her dead in the eyes and quietly said, "No, he'd be ashamed of all of you." Then I walked out, and I had absolutely no idea that dinner was about to destroy my entire family. I wish I could say walking out of that restaurant felt empowering. It didn't. Honestly, I felt sick. My hands were shaking so badly by the time I reached my car that I dropped my keys twice trying to unlock the door. Because even after everything they'd done, part of me still felt guilty. That's what years of manipulation does to you. You start questioning your own right to be angry. I sat in my car for almost 20 minutes staring at the steering wheel while my phone exploded with notifications. Mom calling, Eric calling, Aunt Lisa calling, Melanie calling, again. Then the text started. "Mom, I cannot believe the embarrassment you caused tonight. Eric, you're acting like a selfish loser. Aunt Lisa, you ruined Melanie's special night. Not a single message asking why I was hurt. Not one. Only anger that I'd stopped cooperating. That realization hurt more than the dinner itself. I drove home in silence. And somewhere during that drive, something inside me changed permanently. Because for the first time in my life, I started replaying everything through a different lens. Not as isolated incidents, but as a pattern. A really ugly one. I started remembering things I'd spent years minimizing. Like when Eric crashed his second car at 23, and my parents begged me to co-sign another loan because family sticks together. I ended up making payments on that car for 11 months after Eric stopped paying. Or when my aunt borrowed $5,000 during a rough patch, and suddenly forgot about it the moment she posted vacation photos from Cancun 2 months later. Or every birthday dinner where I somehow always ended up covering the bill because everyone forgot their wallet. Or every holiday where I was expected to buy expensive gifts while receiving thoughtless last-minute garbage in return. One year Eric literally gave me a half-used beard trimmer, still had hair in it, but somehow I was expected to spend hundreds on everyone else. The more I thought about it, the angrier I got. By the time I got home, I wasn't guilty anymore. I was done. And that terrified me. Because when you spend your entire life being the dependable one, people don't react well when you suddenly develop boundaries. I walked into my condo, loosened my tie, poured myself a drink, and ignored my phone for another hour. Then around midnight, I finally checked my voicemail. Big mistake. My mother's voice came through immediately. "Joshua, I hope you're proud of yourself. Melanie is hysterical. Jason's family thinks we're trashy now. You made this family look horrible tonight." Not we, me, always me. Then came another voicemail from Eric. "You know Mom's crying, right? Dad would seriously be disappointed in you." That one nearly made me throw my phone across the room, because Eric hadn't even visited Dad regularly when he was dying. I had. I was the one driving him to treatments. I was the one handling hospital paperwork. I was the one sitting beside his bed at 3 in the morning while my family posted inspirational Facebook quotes pretending they cared. But somehow they still acted like they owned his memory more than I did. I muted my phone after that. The next morning I woke up with this heavy feeling sitting in my chest. Not sadness, clarity. And clarity can be dangerous when people benefit from your confusion. I logged into my banking accounts before work. Now here's something important. About 4 years earlier, my mother convinced me to help manage several shared family expenses because, according to her, you're the financially smart one. Huge mistake. I handled automatic payments for my mother's utilities, Eric's car insurance, part of my aunt's phone bill, a shared emergency fund account. Even Melanie's wedding venue installment was temporarily routed through an account I supervised because apparently nobody else could figure out the paperwork. At the time, I thought I was helping. Now I realized I'd basically allowed myself to become unpaid financial support staff for grown adults. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I started freezing accounts. One by one, not stealing anybody's money, not doing anything illegal, just removing myself completely. No more autopay management. No more shared oversight. No more emergency transfers. No more being everybody's safety net. And honestly, the second I clicked those buttons, I felt lighter, like I could breathe properly for the first time in years. Then my phone rang. Mom, I ignored it. 30 seconds later, Eric, ignored. Then Aunt Lisa. Then Melanie. Then Mom again. Finally, I answered. The second I picked up, my mother exploded. What did you do? No hello, no conversation, straight panic. I calmly leaned back in my chair. I removed myself from the family accounts. You had no right. I almost laughed at that. No right, they're my accounts, Mom. They're family accounts. No, they're accounts I've been managing for adults who refuse to manage their own lives. Silence. Then came the guilt tactics. Your brother needs that insurance payment processed. He's 30 years old. Your aunt's electricity bill is due. She can pay it herself. You're being cruel. That word again, cruel. Funny how people call boundaries cruel when they lose access to your resources. My mother's voice suddenly softened, and honestly, that was worse. Josh, sweetheart, we're family. There it was, the manipulation tone. The same tone she used every time she needed something from me. I closed my eyes for a second, then quietly asked the question I should have asked years earlier. What exactly does this family do for me? Silence. Long silence. And that silence answered everything. Finally, she snapped again. You're keeping score now? No, I said calmly. I'm noticing there's never been balance. She started crying immediately, not sad crying, weaponized crying. The kind designed to make you panic and apologize. It used to work every time, not anymore. Then she said something that permanently changed how I saw her. You know your father wanted you to take care of this family. I felt my stomach twist instantly. Because she was lying. Dad never said that, not once. If anything, my father used to quietly warn me about this exact situation. I suddenly remembered a conversation from years earlier. We were sitting outside his hospital room after one of his treatments, and he looked at me and said, Josh, don't spend your whole life carrying people who refuse to walk on their own. At the time, I didn't fully understand what he meant. Now I did completely. I opened my eyes and said quietly, don't use Dad to manipulate me ever again. Then I hung up. And for the first time in my entire life, I blocked my mother's number. The silence afterward felt terrifying. And peaceful, mostly terrifying, but peaceful too. Then things got worse, because apparently my family wasn't just angry I refused to pay for dinner. They were panicking, because without me, their entire system was starting to collapse. Over the next 3 days, my family completely unraveled. And honestly, watching it happen was like finally seeing a magic trick from the other side. Once you know how the illusion works, you can't unsee it. I went to work Monday morning expecting drama. What I didn't expect was 23 missed calls before lunch. 23, most from family, some from numbers I didn't even recognize. Apparently my relatives had started recruiting other people to pressure me. Classic. I ignored all of them, at first. Then around noon, my coworker Denise leaned over my cubicle wall and said, there's a woman in the lobby asking for you. My stomach dropped instantly. I already knew. Mom. I walked downstairs and there she was standing near reception with her arms crossed dramatically like she was preparing for a courtroom scene instead of a conversation. The second she saw me, her face tightened. There you are. No hello, no normal human interaction, just tension. I glanced at the receptionist who suddenly looked deeply interested in her computer screen. Mom, I said quietly, you can't just show up at my job. Well, you blocked me. Notice what she didn't say, not I was worried about you, not can we talk. No, her complaint was loss of access. I stepped outside with her because I refused to let her create a scene in my office building. The second the doors closed behind us, she exploded. Do you have any idea what you've done? I stared at her. That seems to be everybody's favorite question lately. This isn't funny, Joshua. I'm not laughing. And I wasn't. Because suddenly, standing there in daylight away from family gatherings and emotional chaos, I noticed something unsettling. My mother only spoke to me warmly when she needed something. Every interaction was transactional. Even her concern wasn't concern. It was panic over losing control. She lowered her voice dramatically. Your aunt can't cover the remaining venue payment. I blinked once. There it is. What? The real reason you're here? Her jaw tightened. That venue was booked under your financial verification, because Melanie said she needed temporary help processing paperwork. She does need help. No, I said calmly. She needs accountability. Mom looked genuinely offended by that, as if accountability itself was cruelty. You're abandoning your family over one misunderstanding. I almost laughed. One misunderstanding. Then years started pouring out of me before I could stop them. What about Eric crashing cars and leaving me with payments? Silence. What about Aunt Lisa never repaying loans? Silence. What about every holiday where you volunteered my money without asking me? Her face hardened instantly. We sacrificed for you growing up. There it was, the parental debt argument. As if raising your child gives you lifetime access to their bank account. You were supposed to raise me, I said quietly. That was your job. She looked stunned. probably because I'd never pushed back this directly before. Then came the real guilt weapon. "We're struggling, Josh." I stared at her for a long moment, because part of me still cared. That was the worst part. Even after everything, some stupid piece of me still wanted to help. Then I remembered something. 3 months earlier, my mother and Eric had taken a weekend trip to Vegas. Meanwhile, she'd been telling me she was barely surviving financially. And suddenly, I understood something important. People who truly struggle financially usually cut luxuries first. My family cut responsibility first. I sighed. "You guys don't have a money problem." Her eyes narrowed immediately. "You have a spending problem and an accountability problem." That hit hard, I could tell, because it was true. She crossed her arms tightly. "So that's it, you're turning your back on us?" "No," I said calmly. "I'm stopping you from standing on mine." For a second, she just stared at me, and I swear something shifted in her expression. Like she was realizing manipulation wasn't working anymore. That terrified her. Then her tone changed completely. Cold, sharp. "If you do this, don't expect this family to forgive you." That should have scared me. Instead, I felt weirdly calm. Because forgiveness only matters when somebody actually values you. And for the first time, I started realizing my family valued access to me more than me myself. So I looked directly at my mother and quietly said, "I think I'm finally okay with that." Then I walked back into work while she stood frozen on the sidewalk. And I'll never forget the expression on her face. Not sadness, not heartbreak. Loss of control. That night things escalated even further. Because apparently Melanie's fiancé, Jason, had started asking questions. Questions my family couldn't answer. And that's when the cracks really started showing. Around 8 that evening, I got a text from an unknown number. "Unknown, hey, this is Jason, can we talk?" I stared at the message for a long time because something about it felt different. No aggression, no guilt trip, just direct. So against my better judgment, I replied, "Me about what?" 3 dots appeared immediately. Then, I don't think I got the full story about the dinner. That sentence alone told me everything. My family had already started rewriting history. I agreed to meet him at a coffee shop near my condo the next evening. And honestly, I expected confrontation. What I got instead shocked me completely. Jason already looked exhausted when he arrived, like he hadn't slept properly in days. The second he sat down, he sighed heavily. "I owe you an apology." I blinked. That was the last thing I expected. Jason rubbed his face tiredly. "I didn't know they planned that." "The bill?" He nodded immediately. "Melanie told me your family always handled events together financially. I thought everybody contributed." I almost laughed at how carefully manipulated that wording was. "Yeah," I said quietly. "By everybody, they meant me." Jason looked genuinely uncomfortable. Then he lowered his voice. "Josh, did your family actually expect you to pay the whole thing?" I stared at him for a second. "You really didn't know?" "No." And honestly, I believed him, because unlike my relatives, Jason actually looked embarrassed, not angry, embarrassed. Then he said something that made my stomach twist. "Your mom told Melanie you'd already agreed." I felt actual heat rise in my chest. "She what?" Jason nodded slowly. "She said you offered because you wanted to support the engagement." For a second, I genuinely couldn't speak. Because that meant this wasn't entitlement in the moment. This was premeditated. They had literally volunteered my money behind my back. Jason leaned forward quietly. And after the dinner, things started sounding weird. "What do you mean?" He hesitated, then finally said, "Everybody kept talking about you like you were some kind of financial backup plan." That sentence hit harder than he probably realized. Because hearing it from an outsider suddenly made everything sound insane. Jason continued carefully. "I asked Melanie why your name was connected to the venue paperwork, and she said, 'Josh always takes care of things.' Always. Not sometimes, not when asked. Always, like it was my assigned role in the family ecosystem." Jason looked deeply uncomfortable now. "Then your brother joked that you'd come crawling back because you always do." That one hurt. Because he was right. I always did, until now. I leaned back in my chair slowly, and for the first time I said something out loud I'd never fully admitted before. "I think my family's been using me for years." Jason didn't even hesitate. "I think they have too." And hearing someone outside the family confirm it, that broke something inside me completely. Because denial became impossible after that. After meeting Jason, I sat in my car for almost an hour just staring through the windshield. Not because I was shocked anymore. Because deep down, I think I'd always known. I just didn't want to admit it. There's a weird kind of grief that comes with realizing your family loves what you provide more than who you are. It makes you question every memory, every favor, every "we're proud of you." You start wondering if any of it was real, and honestly, that realization hurt more than the engagement dinner ever could. The next few days became painfully quiet, not peaceful quiet, the kind of quiet where you know something bad is brewing behind the scenes. Nobody contacted me directly anymore. No calls, no voicemails, nothing. At first, I thought maybe they'd finally backed off. Then Friday night happened. I was sitting on my couch half watching some random Netflix documentary when my phone buzzed. It was my cousin Rachel. Now Rachel usually stayed out of family drama completely. She was one of the only relatives I still somewhat trusted. Her text was short. Rachel, Josh, I think you need to see this. Then she sent screenshots. A lot of screenshots. From the family group chat. A group chat I suddenly realized I'd been removed from. Honestly, that part alone stung more than I expected, not because I wanted to stay in it, but because it confirmed how quickly they turned me into the villain. I opened the screenshots, and my stomach dropped instantly because these people weren't just angry. They were mocking me. My Aunt Lisa. Josh always does this dramatic victim thing when he doesn't get enough attention. Eric, give him a week. He'll come crawling back like always. Mom, he's having some kind of emotional breakdown. Just ignore him for now. Melanie. I swear he ruined my engagement out of jealousy. That one actually made me laugh out loud. Jealous of what? A fiancé who looked one stress headache away from fleeing the country. Then I kept scrolling. And that's when I saw the message that changed everything. Aunt Lisa had written, honestly, we should have known better than to rely on him publicly. We should have just added the dinner charge to the wedding account later. I reread that message 3 times, slowly, because suddenly the full picture became horrifyingly clear. The dinner wasn't a spontaneous setup. They had planned multiple ways to make me pay. My chest actually tightened reading it. Then came another message from Eric. Bro acts like he's the only person with money. Dad left him everything anyway. That stopped me cold, because it was completely false. Dad hadn't left me everything. Most of Dad's savings disappeared during cancer treatments. The small inheritance I received mostly came from a life insurance payout Dad specifically wanted me to use for stability, not family expenses. He literally told me that. But apparently my relatives had rewritten history so thoroughly that they genuinely believed I owed them access to my finances forever. Then I saw the message that finally broke whatever emotional attachment I still had left. My mother wrote, Josh has always been easier to manipulate through guilt. Just give him time. I swear my vision blurred for a second. Not because I was surprised, because seeing it written out so casually felt like being punched in the chest. Easier to manipulate through guilt. Like I wasn't her son, like I was some predictable machine. I sat there staring at that sentence for a long time. Then Rachel sent another text. Rachel, I'm sorry. I didn't realize they talked about you like this. I typed and erased like 5 different responses before finally sending me. Neither did I. A few minutes later, Rachel called me. The second I answered, she sighed heavily. Josh, are you okay? And weirdly, that simple question almost made me emotional, because nobody in my immediate family had asked me that once, not one time. I think so, I said quietly. Rachel hesitated, then said carefully, you know they've depended on you financially for years, right? I laughed bitterly. Yeah, I'm starting to figure that out. No, she said softly. I mean everybody knows. That hit hard, everybody knows. Apparently I was the last person to fully understand my own role in the family. Rachel continued carefully. Aunt Lisa jokes about it constantly. I felt sick instantly. What? She calls you the retirement plan? Silence, actual silence, because hearing that physically hurt. Rachel kept going, almost reluctantly now. And your mom? She stopped. I swallowed hard. What about my mom? She tells people you'd never cut the family off because you're too loyal. Loyal, that word used to mean something good to me. Now it just sounded like another word for controllable. Rachel lowered her voice. Josh, I really don't think they expected you to finally say no. Neither did I, that was the truth. Even after the dinner, some part of me thought I'd eventually calm down and go back to normal. That's what always happened before. But this time felt different, because for the first time I wasn't reacting emotionally anymore. I was seeing clearly, and clarity is dangerous when your entire role in a family depends on self-sacrifice. Then Rachel said something unexpected. You know Grandma agrees with you, right? I blinked. Wait, Grandma knows about this? Oh, she knows everything. Now that shocked me. My grandmother stayed out of conflict almost obsessively. She was the calm center of the family, the one person everybody respected, at least publicly. What did she say? I asked quietly. Rachel hesitated, then she laughed softly. She said, and I quote, it's about damn time Joshua stopped letting those people drain him dry. I actually sat up straighter. Because my grandmother almost never cursed. Ever. Rachel sighed again. She's really upset with your mom. That honestly hurt too, because I knew Grandma loved keeping the family together more than anything, and now even she was fed up. Then Rachel's voice dropped lower. There's something else. Immediately my stomach tightened. What? The wedding venue called Melanie yesterday. I frowned. Okay, they found out the payment account was frozen. Ah, there it was. Apparently reality had finally arrived. And they gave her 72 hours before canceling the reservation. I leaned back slowly, because suddenly everything made sense. The panic, the manipulation, the sudden desperation. This wasn't about hurt feelings anymore. It was about consequences, real financial consequences. Rachel sighed heavily. Jason's been fighting with Melanie nonstop. I closed my eyes for a second, because honestly, I felt bad for him. He'd unknowingly married himself into a family built entirely around emotional and financial manipulation. Then Rachel delivered the sentence that changed the entire situation. "Josh, I think Jason's reconsidering the engagement." Silence, long silence, not because I was shocked, because suddenly I realized this whole thing had gotten way bigger than a dinner bill. The lies were collapsing. And once manipulative people lose control of the narrative, they panic. Badly, I thanked Rachel for the screenshots and hung up. Then I just sat there in my apartment surrounded by silence. Real silence, not guilt, not pressure, not obligations, just peace. And for the first time in years, I realized how exhausting my family actually was. Because the moment they lost financial access to me, their entire relationship with me turned hostile almost immediately. That's not love, that's dependency disguised as family. Then my phone buzzed again. Another text from Jason. "Jason, can we meet tomorrow? There are things you deserve to know." And honestly, something told me my family's lies were only beginning to unravel. The next afternoon, I met Jason at a small bar near the river. And the second I saw him, I knew things had gotten worse. He looked exhausted, not tired, defeated. The kind of exhausted that comes from realizing the person you plan to marry might not actually be who you thought they were. He sat down across from me and immediately said, "I think your family's been lying to me since the beginning." I didn't even know how to respond to that. Jason rubbed both hands over his face. After the dinner, I started asking questions. And every answer sounded different depending on who I talked to. That didn't surprise me at all. Manipulative people are terrible at consistency once they panic. Jason sighed heavily. "Your mom told me you volunteered to help financially because you're passionate about supporting family events." I almost laughed. Passionate. Nobody is passionate about funding other adults. Then he added, "But Melanie said your dad promised you'd always help the family before he died." That made my stomach twist instantly, because now they were using Dad's memory on other people too. I stared at the table quietly for a second. "My father never said that." Jason nodded slowly. "I figured." Then he pulled out his phone. "Josh, I need you to see something." He showed me screenshots from messages between him and Melanie, and honestly, reading them felt like getting hit repeatedly in the chest. One message from Melanie said, "Josh acts difficult sometimes, but he always caves eventually." Another, "My mom says guilt works best on him." I physically looked away from the screen after that, because suddenly it became undeniable. They didn't just take advantage of me. They studied me, like they knew exactly which emotional buttons to push. Jason locked his phone and leaned back. "I don't think this is normal." "It's not," I said quietly. Then he dropped the real bomb. "The wedding venue isn't the only unpaid thing." I frowned immediately. "What do you mean?" Jason laughed bitterly. "Apparently your aunt used your name as a financial reference for 2 separate wedding vendors." I felt my jaw tight. "She what?" "I found out yesterday." I suddenly felt furious in a way I hadn't before, because now this wasn't emotional manipulation anymore. They were actively tying my financial reputation to obligations I never agreed to. Jason shook his head slowly. "When I confronted Melanie, she said everybody assumed you'd help eventually." Everybody assumed. That phrase echoed in my head, because nobody ever asked what I wanted. They only discussed how to access what I had. Then Jason looked directly at me. "Josh, can I ask you something honestly?" "Sure." "Why did you tolerate this for so long?" That question hurt, because I didn't actually have a good answer. Finally, I shrugged weakly. "They're my family." Jason nodded slowly. "Yeah, but family's not supposed to treat one person like emergency funding." That sentence stayed in my head long after we left, because deep down, I think I needed somebody outside the family to finally say it out loud. That same night, things exploded completely. Around 11 p.m., someone started pounding on my apartment door. Not knocking, pounding. I already knew who it was before I opened it. Eric. The second I unlocked the door, he stormed inside like he owned the place. "You've lost your damn mind." No hello, no conversation, straight anger. I shut the door slowly behind him. "What do you want?" "What do I want?" he snapped. "Mom's crying every day because of you." I stared at him calmly. And that caught him off guard instantly, because usually I'd start apologizing by now. Eric scoffed loudly. "You seriously think you're the victim here?" I crossed my arms. "You done?" "No, actually." He started pacing around my living room dramatically. "Melanie's wedding might get canceled because you're being selfish." There it was again. Selfish. Funny how protecting yourself becomes selfish when people benefit from your self-destruction. I looked at him quietly. "Why exactly is that my responsibility?" Eric stared at me like I'd spoken another language. "Because we're family." "No," I said calmly, "because you all decided my money belongs to you." That made him angry instantly. "You always act like you're better than everybody." I actually laughed at that, because it was projection at its finest. "I don't think I'm better than you, Eric. I just think grown adults should handle their own bills." His face darkened immediately. "You know what your problem is?" I leaned against the counter. "Enlighten me." "You think because you make more money you can judge everybody." That one almost got me. Because for years, they trained me to feel guilty for being financially stable. Like responsibility itself was arrogance. But now I saw it clearly. They didn't resent me for judging them. They resented me for finally setting limits. Eric suddenly pointed at me aggressively. You know Mom had to borrow money yesterday because of you? I blinked. From who? He hesitated, then muttered. Grandma. That instantly made me angry, because Grandma lived on a fixed retirement income, and somehow my mother still felt comfortable taking money from her. I stared at Eric in disbelief. You guys are borrowing from Grandma while calling me selfish. She offered. No, I snapped for the first time. You people just keep taking from whoever lets you. Silence. Real silence. Eric looked shocked hearing me raise my voice. Because I almost never did. Then he said the sentence that finally shattered whatever relationship we had left. You've changed since Dad died. That hit hard, but not the way he expected, because suddenly I realized something terrifying. No, I hadn't changed after Dad died. I just no longer had Dad around to absorb part of the family's dysfunction. He used to protect me more than I realized. Smooth things over, carry burdens quietly. And after he died, they shifted more of that pressure onto me. I looked directly at my brother and said quietly, No, Eric, I just finally stopped letting you use me. His face went completely cold. Then he laughed bitterly. Fine. Don't help but don't come crying when this family cuts you off. And honestly, that threat should have devastated me. Instead, I felt relief. Because if financial access was the only thing keeping us connected, then maybe there wasn't much real family left to lose in the first place. 2 days after Eric showed up at my apartment, my grandmother called me. And unlike everyone else in the family, she sounded tired. Not manipulative, not angry, just tired. Joshua, she said softly, can you come see me? The second I heard her voice, I said yes. Because Grandma was the one person in the family who'd always treated me like a human being instead of a resource. I drove out to her house Sunday afternoon. The same little house she and Grandpa bought 40 years ago. Same flower pots, same wind chimes, same smell of coffee and old books the second you walked inside. And honestly, the moment I stepped through that door, I realized how emotionally exhausted I really was. Grandma hugged me tightly, longer than usual. Then she looked at me carefully and said, You look like your father. That nearly broke me instantly. We sat at the kitchen table while she poured tea, and for a while neither of us spoke. Then finally she sighed. They've been awful to you. No hesitation, no pretending, just truth. And hearing somebody acknowledge it out loud almost made me emotional. I stared down at my cup quietly. I thought maybe I was overreacting. Grandma snorted softly. Oh, honey. No, then she leaned back in her chair and said something that completely changed how I viewed my family. This didn't start recently. I frowned. What do you mean? She looked genuinely sad now. Your mother and aunt started depending on you the moment they realized you wouldn't say no. That hit hard. Because suddenly memories started replaying differently in my head. Being praised for being mature, being called the reliable one, being rewarded emotionally whenever I sacrificed something. I thought it was love. Now I realized it was conditioning. Grandma stirred her tea slowly. Your father noticed it years ago. I looked up immediately. He did. Oh, yes. That made my chest tighten, because Dad rarely criticized family directly. Grandma nodded slowly. He worried about you constantly near the end. I swallowed hard. What did he say? She looked me directly in the eyes. He said he was afraid they'd drain you dry after he was gone. That one hurt badly, because it confirmed everything. Dad saw this coming, and somehow I still walked straight into it for years afterward. I laughed bitterly under my breath. I feel stupid. Grandma immediately shook her head. No, you loved your family. That sentence hit me harder than almost anything else, because she was right. I tolerated everything because I genuinely loved them, and manipulative people can do a lot of damage when they know you love them more than yourself. Then Grandma sighed heavily. Your mother called me crying. I rolled my eyes slightly. Of course she did. She wanted me to convince you to pay for the wedding. I laughed once in disbelief, even now, even after everything. Still about money. Grandma's expression hardened slightly. When I refused, she accused me of choosing sides. That honestly made me angry, because my mother was nearly 60 years old, still throwing emotional tantrums when she didn't get control. Then Grandma quietly said, I need to tell you something, Joshua. The tone in her voice instantly made my stomach tight. What? She hesitated, then looked down at her hands. Your mother borrowed money from me last year too. I frowned immediately. How much? 8,000. My heart actually dropped. What? Grandma quickly raised a hand. She promised she'd repay it. She didn't, did she? Silence. That told me enough. I leaned back slowly, stunned. Because this whole time my mother had acted like she was barely surviving financially while secretly taking money from her retired mother. I suddenly understood why Grandma looked so exhausted. She wasn't just watching the family collapse. She'd been carrying pieces of it too. Then she said something that made me feel physically sick. She asked me not to tell you. Of course she did. Because the family system depended on me believing I was the only safety net. The reliable one, the fixer, the emergency solution. Meanwhile, everybody else quietly took from whoever they could. I rubbed my face slowly. How bad is it really? Grandma hesitated again. Too long. That's when I knew the answer was awful. Finally, she whispered, "Your aunt and mother are both in serious debt." I stared at her. What kind of debt? Credit cards, personal loans, some unpaid taxes. Taxes, Jesus Christ. And suddenly everything clicked together perfectly. The constant emergencies, the emotional pressure, the panic over losing access to me. This wasn't occasional irresponsibility. This family was financially drowning. And instead of changing their behavior, they built their survival plan around me. I sat there in silence trying to process all of it. Then Grandma said quietly, "Your father never wanted this life for you." That one nearly broke me, because suddenly I remembered something from years earlier. Dad and I were cleaning out the garage together maybe 8 months before he got really sick. And randomly he'd looked at me and said, "Joshua, don't confuse being needed with being loved." At the time, I didn't fully understand what he meant. Now it felt like he'd been trying to warn me all along. I looked at Grandma quietly. "Do you think they actually love me?" She looked heartbroken hearing that question. Then she reached across the table and grabbed my hand. "I think they do love you," she said softly. "But I think they also got very comfortable benefiting from you." And honestly, that answer hurt more because it felt true, because the worst manipulators aren't always evil people. Sometimes they're selfish people who convince themselves their dependence is normal. Then Grandma squeezed my hand gently. "But love without respect eventually becomes exploitation." That sentence stayed in my head the entire drive home. And by the time I pulled into my apartment garage, I think I finally accepted something I'd been avoiding for years. I couldn't save my family, because they didn't actually want help. They wanted access. And the moment access disappeared, so did their version of love. 3 days later, the entire family exploded. And somehow, even after everything, they still tried blaming me. It started with a phone call from Rachel around noon. The second I answered, she said, "Jason called off the engagement." I froze. "What? Temporary maybe, but he moved out." I slowly sat down on my couch trying to process that. Because even though I knew things were bad, I didn't think they were that bad. Rachel sighed heavily. "They had a huge fight last night. About the money, about the lies." Apparently after meeting me, Jason started digging deeper. And the deeper he dug, the uglier things got. Melanie admitted she knew about the dinner setup beforehand. My mother admitted they expected me to eventually calm down and pay. And Aunt Lisa apparently said something so insane that Jason nearly walked out immediately. She told him, "Josh always throws tantrums before doing the right thing." Tantrums, that word kept showing up. Because manipulative people love reframing boundaries as emotional instability. Rachel kept talking. "Jason found out about the vendor accounts too." Jesus. Yeah, he completely lost it. Apparently multiple wedding expenses had been discussed under the assumption I'd eventually contribute, not because I agreed. Because the family assumed they could pressure me later. Jason finally asked the question nobody else ever bothered asking. What happens if Josh says no? And apparently nobody had an answer. Because the entire plan depended on emotional manipulation succeeding. Rachel sighed again. Melanie accused him of abandoning her. I rubbed my forehead slowly. And he told her he didn't trust her family anymore. Honestly, I couldn't even blame him. Because once you realize a family operates through guilt, pressure, and financial dependency, you start wondering where the manipulation ends. Then Rachel hesitated before saying, "It got worse after that." "How?" She told him if he really loved her, he'd help cover the missing wedding costs himself. I actually closed my eyes, because of course she did. The pattern never changed. Find somebody responsible. Apply guilt, call it love. Rachel's voice lowered. Jason told her he felt like he was marrying into a financial trap. That sentence hit hard because it was exactly what I'd escaped. Then came the real disaster. Apparently during the argument, Melanie blamed my mother for promising Josh would handle everything. And according to Rachel, my mother completely snapped. Instead of taking responsibility, she started screaming that I ruined the family by becoming cold and selfish. Even in private. Even after everything collapsed, still my fault, Rachel laughed bitterly. Grandma finally lost her patience. Now that got my attention. What happened? She told everybody they'd spent years treating you like a bank account. Silence. Because Grandma almost never confronted people directly, ever. Rachel sounded shocked even retelling it. She literally said, "You people only panic when Joshua stops paying for your mistakes." I swear I almost smiled hearing that. Apparently nobody knew how to respond, because deep down they all knew it was true. Then Rachel added quietly, "Your mom cried and said she sacrificed her whole life for her children." I leaned back against the couch. There it was again, the eternal parental guilt card, but sacrifice stops being noble when it becomes emotional blackmail 30 years later. Then Rachel delivered the final piece. "Jason packed his stuff this morning." Damn. I honestly didn't know what to feel. Part of me felt bad for Melanie. Another part remembered she literally participated in setting me up for a $3,600 bill. Actions have consequences. Eventually. After we hung up, I just sat there in silence. And weirdly, I didn't feel victorious. I felt sad. Because this family had become so dependent on manipulation that the second somebody stopped cooperating, everything collapsed. Then my phone buzzed. A text from Mom, first message in over a week. Mom, I hope you're happy. I stared at the screen for a long time because honestly, that message perfectly summarized our entire relationship. Not can we fix this? Not. I miss you, not I'm sorry, just blame, pure blame. For a moment, I actually considered responding. Then another text came through. Mom, your father would hate what you've become. And just like that, any guilt I still carried disappeared completely. Because loving parents don't weaponize grief to regain control. I looked at the message one last time, then blocked her again, for good this time. And for the first time since all of this started, I didn't feel guilty afterward. I felt free. A week later, I got invited to what my aunt called a family reconciliation dinner, which honestly sounded less like healing and more like an ambush. At first, I wasn't going to go, but then Grandma called me personally, and all she said was, "Please come, I think some things need to finally be said out loud." So, against my better judgment, I agreed. The dinner was at my mother's house, the same house I grew up in, and pulling into that driveway felt surreal. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't arriving as the peacekeeper. I wasn't there to fix anything. I wasn't there to pay for anything, and apparently that made everyone uncomfortable. The second I walked inside, the tension hit me like a wall. Nobody greeted me normally. Eric barely looked at me. Aunt Lisa looked irritated before I'd even sat down. Melanie looked exhausted from crying. And my mother, she looked furious, not sad, not heartbroken, furious, like I disobeyed her publicly. Grandma was the only person who hugged me, quietly, tightly. Then we all sat down at the dining table in complete silence. Honestly, it felt less like dinner and more like a hostage negotiation. Finally, my mother spoke first. I think this family needs to move forward. Notice that? Not I owe you an apology, not we handled things badly, just move forward. Skip accountability, go straight back to normal. Classic, I leaned back calmly. Okay, that clearly wasn't the response she expected. She frowned slightly. We've all said things out of anger. There it was again. That subtle attempt to spread blame evenly across everyone. As if my reaction and their behavior were equally wrong, I looked directly at her. No, I reacted to years of disrespect. Silence instantly filled the room. Eric rolled his eyes dramatically. Here we go. I ignored him completely. Then Aunt Lisa sighed loudly. Josh, nobody was trying to use you. I actually laughed at that. Not because it was funny, because it was insane. You volunteered me to pay thousands of dollars without asking me. That's what family does? No, I said calmly. That's what entitled people do. Her face turned red immediately. My mother jumped in fast. You're speaking very harshly right now, and you're avoiding responsibility. That shut her up for a second. Then Melanie suddenly burst into tears. I can't believe my engagement got ruined over money. And honestly, that sentence irritated me more than anything else said that night. Because even now, even after all the lies, she still framed herself as the victim. I looked at her quietly. Your engagement didn't collapse because of money. Everybody went silent. It collapsed because Jason realized this family manipulates people financially. That hit hard. Eric immediately slammed his hand against the table. You think you're some perfect victim now? No, I said calmly. I think I was useful to all of you. Nobody answered, because nobody could. Then my mother's mask finally slipped completely. You've become arrogant. There it was, the real issue, not boundaries, not disrespect, control. I shook my head slowly. No. I just stopped feeling guilty for saying no. My mother laughed bitterly. After everything we sacrificed for you? And finally, something in me snapped completely, because I was exhausted of love being used like debt, exhausted of every conversation becoming emotional blackmail, exhausted of carrying adults who refused to stand on their own. So I looked directly at my mother and said the thing I'd been holding in for years. You know what's crazy? Silence. I spent my entire life trying to earn love in this family by being useful. Nobody moved, nobody spoke, and the second I stopped paying for things, all of you treated me like a villain. The room went completely quiet. Because deep down, they knew it was true. I looked around the table slowly. At Dad's funeral, every single person here talked about how kind and generous he was. My voice cracked slightly there. But none of you learned the most important lesson from his life. Even Grandma looked emotional now. I swallowed hard and continued. He gave because he loved people, not because they were entitled to him. My mother looked away immediately. That was the first time all night she couldn't maintain eye contact. Then Grandma quietly spoke, and when she did, the whole room froze. Joshua's right. Nobody expected that, not even me. Grandma looked around the table slowly, disappointment written all over her face. You've all leaned on him for years. Nobody interrupted her. You praised him when he sacrificed himself for you and punished him the moment he stopped. Aunt Lisa started crying quietly. Eric looked furious. My mother looked humiliated, but Grandma wasn't finished. You confused his kindness for obligation. That sentence landed like a bomb in the room, because it perfectly summarized the entire family dynamic. Then Grandma looked directly at my mother. And you especially should be ashamed for using your husband's memory against your own son. My mother's face crumpled instantly. And for the first time all night, she looked genuinely affected. Not manipulative, not dramatic. Actually affected. Then Grandma stood up slowly. I'm too old to watch this family destroy the one person who kept helping all of you. And honestly, that nearly broke me. Because for the first time in my life, somebody defended me without needing anything in return. Nobody spoke after that. The entire room just sat there drowning in the truth. Then I quietly stood up. I love all of you, I said softly, but I can't keep doing this anymore. My mother finally looked at me, and for a split second, I saw something real in her expression, fear. Because I think she finally realized this wasn't temporary anymore, I was actually done. I grabbed my keys and walked toward the door. Nobody stopped me, nobody yelled, nobody chased after me, and honestly, that silence told me more than words ever could. Because for the first time, they had nothing left to use against me. After the family meeting, nobody contacted me for almost 2 weeks. And honestly, the silence felt strange, not bad, just unfamiliar. For years, my phone constantly buzzed with problems that somehow became mine to solve. Bills, arguments, emergencies, favors, guilt trips disguised as family support. And suddenly nothing. I started sleeping better, eating better. I even noticed work felt less stressful because I wasn't mentally carrying 6 other adults every day. It was like my nervous system finally realized the emergency was over. Then one Thursday night, I got a message I never expected. From Mom, not a guilt trip, not blame, just, can we talk? I stared at the screen for a long time. Part of me wanted to ignore it completely, but another part of me remembered she was still my mother. So eventually I replied, okay. We met at a small cafe near her neighborhood the next afternoon, and honestly, she looked older, not physically, emotionally. Like the last few weeks had finally caught up to her. The second she sat down, she looked nervous. I couldn't remember the last time I'd seen my mother nervous around me. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Then quietly, she said, I talked to your grandmother. I nodded once. Okay. She was very honest with me. That almost made me laugh. Grandma had probably torn through everybody like a hurricane after I left. Mom looked down at her coffee cup. Then she said something I genuinely never thought I'd hear. I think I got too comfortable depending on you. Silence. Because after weeks of blame and manipulation, that tiny bit of accountability felt massive. She swallowed hard. When your father got sick, everything became survival mode. I listened quietly. For years, you were the only person I never worried about. That sentence hit weirdly hard, because I understood what she meant. I'd always been the stable one, the safe one, the child she never had to rescue, and somewhere along the line stability became expectation. Expectation became dependence. Dependence became entitlement. Mom rubbed her hands together nervously. I didn't realize how unfair it became. Honestly, part of me believed her, not because it excused everything, but because dysfunctional family systems usually grow slowly. People normalize unhealthy behavior one small step at a time until nobody questions it anymore. Then she said the thing that mattered most. I'm sorry for using your father against you. That one nearly broke me. Because out of everything she'd done, that hurt the deepest. I looked away for a second trying to steady myself. Mom's voice cracked slightly. That was cruel. Yes, it was, but hearing her admit it mattered more than I expected. Then she whispered, You didn't deserve that. For the first time in weeks, I felt some of my anger loosen, not disappear, but soften slightly. Then she looked at me carefully. I don't expect things to go back to normal. Good, because they couldn't. I leaned back slowly. I love you, Mom, but I can't go back to being responsible for everybody. She nodded immediately. I know. And honestly, that might have been the most shocking part of the entire conversation. No argument. No guilt, no manipulation, just acceptance. Then she admitted something that explained everything. After your father died, I think I started leaning on you emotionally and financially because you reminded me of him. That hit deep. Because Dad was the dependable one too. The fixer. The calm center of the family. And after he was gone, they unconsciously pushed that role onto me. Except I was never supposed to carry it alone. Mom wiped at her eyes quietly. Jason was right. I frowned slightly. About what? He said this family treats responsible people like life rafts instead of people. Damn, that one hit hard, because it was painfully accurate. Then Mom gave a sad little laugh. Your grandmother said something similar. Of course she did. We sat there quietly for a while after that, not magically healed, not suddenly fixed, just honest for the first time in years. Then Mom reached into her purse and handed me an envelope. What's this? Part of the money I owe Grandma? I blinked in surprise. She refused to take it. That honestly sounded exactly like Grandma. Mom smiled weakly. She told me to give it to you instead. I stared at the envelope without opening it. Then Mom said softly, she said it's time the family starts carrying its own weight. I don't know why that nearly made me emotional. Maybe because for the first time, the burden wasn't automatically being handed back to me. Then Mom looked at me carefully. I know things may never fully recover after this. I nodded honestly. Probably not. And for once, neither of us pretended otherwise. Then she quietly asked, do you think someday you can forgive me? That question sat heavily between us. Because forgiveness is complicated, especially when love and damage exist together. Finally, I answered honestly. I think I already started. And for the first time in a very long time, my mother cried without trying to manipulate anybody. A few months passed after that conversation with my mother. And honestly, my life became unrecognizable in the best way possible, not because everything magically healed. It didn't. Some relationships stayed damaged. Eric barely spoke to me anymore unless absolutely necessary. Aunt Lisa remained convinced I'd abandoned the family. Melanie and Jason officially ended the engagement 2 months later. Apparently, once the financial lies came out, the trust never recovered. And weirdly, nobody blamed me anymore, because eventually the truth became impossible to ignore. The family had spent years building unstable lives while assuming someone else would absorb the consequences. Usually me. But once that stopped, reality hit everybody hard. My mother downsized to a smaller apartment. Eric finally got a second job after his car nearly got repossessed. Aunt Lisa started selling handmade crafts online to help pay debt. And for the first time in their lives, they started figuring things out themselves. Not perfectly, not gracefully, but independently. And that mattered. Meanwhile, my own life got quieter, calmer, lighter. I started noticing little things, like how peaceful weekends felt when nobody was calling me to solve a crisis. How relaxing holidays became when I stopped funding everyone else's expectations. How much money I actually saved when I wasn't secretly financing half my family's poor decisions. But the biggest difference wasn't financial. It was emotional. For years, I carried this constant anxiety that somebody in my family was about to need something. And the moment my phone rang, my body would tense automatically, like I was permanently on call. That feeling slowly disappeared. And honestly, I didn't realize how exhausted I'd been until I finally rested. One Saturday morning, I was drinking coffee on my condo balcony when Grandma called. Joshua, she said warmly, I have news. What happened? Your brother apologized to your mother. That surprised me immediately. For what? For depending on everybody else his whole life. Now that shocked me. Apparently, after months of struggling financially on his own, Eric finally realized how much responsibility he'd avoided. Grandma laughed softly. He's still stubborn, but he's growing up. I leaned back, smiling slightly. Honestly, hearing that felt good. Not because I wanted him to suffer, but because I'd spent years protecting him from consequences that he actually needed to experience. Then Grandma added, and your mother started budgeting classes. I nearly spit out my coffee laughing. No way. Yes way. Apparently reality had humbled everybody a little. Funny how accountability works once somebody stops rescuing you. Then Grandma's voice softened. You did the right thing, Joshua. That sentence healed something in me I didn't even realize was still wounded. Because for months, part of me still questioned myself sometimes. Wondered if I'd been too harsh, too cold, too final. But hearing Grandma say that reminded me of something important. Boundaries feel cruel only to people who benefited from your lack of them. Then she said quietly, your father would have been proud of you. And that one nearly made me cry. Because after everything my family said, that was the only opinion that ever truly mattered to me. After we hung up, I sat there staring out over the city for a long time, thinking about how strange life is. Sometimes the hardest thing you'll ever do is disappoint people who only love the version of you that sacrifices himself for them. But if you never disappoint them, you end up abandoning yourself instead. And I think that's what I'd been doing for years, abandoning myself slowly in exchange for approval. Not anymore. About 6 months after the engagement dinner disaster, I visited Dad's grave for the first time in a while. Not because I'd been avoiding him. Because for years, every visit filled me with guilt. Like I was somehow failing the family by not holding everybody together the way he used to. But this time felt different. The weather was cold, the cemetery was quiet, and for the first time in years, my mind wasn't full of stress. I stood there for a while before finally laughing softly to myself. Because honestly, Dad had tried warning me long before all of this happened. I just wasn't ready to hear it yet. I cleaned some leaves away from the headstone and quietly said, I finally understand what you meant. And weirdly, I felt lighter after saying it out loud. Not magically healed, not emotionally perfect, just free. Free from the constant pressure to rescue people who refuse to rescue themselves. Free from confusing guilt with love. Free from believing my worth depended on how much I sacrificed. A few days later, Mom invited me over for dinner. Just me and her. No family meeting, no pressure, no manipulation. And for the first time in years, we actually talked like normal people. She told me she'd started therapy, which honestly shocked me. She admitted losing control of the family forced her to confront how dependent everybody had become on unhealthy patterns. Even Eric had started improving slowly, still immature sometimes, still irresponsible sometimes, but better, actually trying. Turns out consequences can succeed where years of enabling fail. Before I left that night, Mom hugged me tightly and quietly said, "I'm learning that loving someone isn't the same thing as leaning on them." And honestly, that sentence alone made all the pain feel worth it, because maybe this family never would have changed if I kept saying yes forever. Sometimes the person who breaks the toxic cycle gets blamed first, but eventually, they become the reason healing starts. Now when my phone rings, I don't panic anymore. When family asks for help, I decide based on choice instead of guilt. And the biggest difference? I finally understand something I wish I'd learned years earlier. Being loved for what you provide is not the same as being loved for who you are. And once you experience the difference, you can never go back.